Recording in progress.
We are held together thanks to these varied perspectives by common values that grow from our plurality. When we live into these values, we center love, strive for justice, practice generosity, and more. In all these ways, we seek to be like a vibrant and intricate ecosystem, animated as much by collectivity as uniqueness. Next reading is by Dr. Adam Robersmith. Within Unitarian Universalism, I can be an artist, a scientist, at the same time. I can be a believer and a skeptic without any sense of contradiction. I am grateful to be part of a religion that allows for many things to be true at once. Being held in community through deep and active love makes this more than possible. It makes it true.
Thank you, Mary. I forget what I wrote to say what I was talking about today. When I was in our new faith day, I just decided that we never really talked a lot about what we and I think I wrote this up as sort of like an intro to your course, and then more. So spend a little time on history, a little time on theology, but too much to really go from there. Well, let's see. Every once in a while, it's useful to step back and review the ideas that, at least in my understanding, are basic to what brings us together here in the Unitarian Universalist community. Some elements of this are repeated so often that we are all aware of them. We couldn't not. Among these, we teach no particular creed about religious beliefs. We encourage each person to engage in their own search to understand truth and define what brings meaning into their lives. We believe that every person holds inherent worth and dignity, and that we all deserve to be treated fairly and with justice in our society. We try to practice radical welcome and acceptance, and to build and sustain a safe and supportive space for personal question and exploration. And that we have affirmed and promoted specific principles for living, and now have restated our emphasis in terms of shared values, all derived from and anchored in a fundamental love. These things should all sound very familiar to your ear. They're among the things we say in here a lot, and that we try to realize in the ongoing life of our congregation. Each of them is a profound statement at some point of who we are and what we do, and each represents a major change from the mainstream church traditions that our church grew from. A primary assumption in liberal religion is that revelation is not sealed, meaning that our beliefs and practices should always be subject to change in response to shifts in how we understand our world and our environment. Now, revelation is traditionally a religious word, and when this phrase entered our faith tradition many years back, most people thought that what was revealed to us was the nature of God and our relationship with the divine. Today, we embrace all new truths and understandings, including those gained through science. There are many ways to reveal truth, and all can be done. Liberalism itself usually presumes an openness to change. So it makes sense that our liberal religion tries to be flexible and adaptable as we find new problems to solve, new needs to meet. You know, a little bit about our roots. Where do we come from? Our history. I'm not trying to be short than I wrote. There have been followers of Unitarian, one God, and Universalist, all are saved, thinking throughout history. Even some groups of the earliest Christians believed that Jesus was a man, not a God. This didn't change until Rome codified church dogma 300 years after the crucifixion. Those who grew up in the mainstream churches probably know some variant of the Nicene Creed, which states the fixture of the Trinity more clearly than I could ever hope. Unitarianism showed up again in Europe after the Protestant Reformation, when regular people were finally given access to the Bible in their own languages. They didn't have to read Latin. Several Unitarian movements grew in Eastern Europe, and for a brief moment, Transylvania had a Unitarian king and an early version of religious freedom. Poland also had Unitarian communities for some years, though these were eventually eliminated by the Catholic Church. Next, with the onset of the Enlightenment, a number of small Unitarian and Universalist groups grew up in Holland and in England. And some of their thinking did travel to the colonies that preceded our nation. But Unitarian and Universalism, as we know it, as we know them each, are predominantly an American product, both growing into religious movements after the American Revolution. And both were reactions against the rigid Calvinism of the established church in North America. Universalism was a direct response to the Calvinist notion of original sin and innate depravity. The church claimed that the church, bad church, not our good church, fundamentally claimed that we were fundamentally evil, and that most people would be subject to an eternal damnation. The Universalists balked at this, claiming that a loving God could never bring punishment and suffering to humanity, and that salvation is available. It is universal. The Unitarianism in New England was born of the liberal clergy, who read and interpreted the Bible with an eye to enlightenment thought. The focal point of discussion started as the Trinity, which is never described as such in the Scriptures. Unitarians held that Jesus was probably a man, not a part of God. And like the Universalists, they also rejected the notions of human depravity. Instead, they held that persons are born in the image of God and bestowed with divine powers of the soul. Both early Unitarianism and Universalism maintained strong beliefs in God and fundamentally relied on Scripture for religious guidance. Scripture as informed by their own reading insight, not as taught through the church. Then things gradually got mixed up. The Transcendentalists in the mid-1800s introduced notions of looking to other sources besides Scripture, especially human experience in the world of nature, for direct religious inspiration. Gradually, these ideas became intertwined with Unitarian thinking. And then in the early 20th century, another direct challenge came from the humanists, who relied on science and reason and rejected technical, traditional ideas of God. This movement was strongest here in the Midwest, and it was staunchly resisted by the traditional New England Unitarians. But eventually they found it easier to accept and embrace humanism than to find the creed that would be needed to exclude. And after some years of cooperation and some competition, the Unitarians and Universalists finally merged into one denomination in 1961. The Unitarians had an elitist and an intellectual image. The Universalists were more populist and working class. But they managed to put aside some of their petty differences and join as a single liberal religious church. Unfortunately, they couldn't agree on a better name. So we are home with the Unitarian Universal moniker, maybe forever. Now, the church, that's there, every sentence I've read could be, but that's okay, it's true for this whole sermon. Unitarians and Universalists have always produced a large number of activists and reformers, which should come as no surprise given the liberal nature of what faith. From the start, our members have been disproportionately involved in reform and advocacy work, not just in religion, but in areas like mental health, education, public works and sanitation, and many others. Many, not all, UUs were active as abolitionists in the anti-slavery movement. And they met much resistance, often within their own churches, from people that had a vested interest in the status quo and were afraid of abolition. Just as we have always stayed on the liberal edge of church reform, we have tended to remain on the liberal edge of social causes as well. Our record is far from perfect, at least by today's standard. At times in our history, our theology has been complicit with imperialism, eugenics, settler colonialism, white privilege, and effective discrimination against women and minorities. We have suffered most of the sins of our nation and can only take some pride in the fact that we tended to learn to change before most others. We were early participants in the civil rights movement, most visibly in our substantial mobilization of support for Dr. King's March in Summer, where 2 UUs met their deaths due to violence. Many Unitarian Universalists were extremely engaged in the peace movement during the Vietnam War. We were early supporters of LGBTQ+ activism that held a prominent role in the right to marry actions. We have continued to serve as a sanctuary and an ally to gay and trans persons. Many of our congregations have taken active roles to support immigrants, including providing direct sanctuary and asylum in some of our churches. We were early in the environmental movement and are committed to protecting our planet from human destruction. You guys remember environmentalism? That's something we used to worry about before. It's hard to say that we can, but it will come back. We continue to struggle with our ability to connect the marginalized, the dispossessed, and the most needy in society. Most UUs still come from a background of affluence, and our capacity to cross boundaries and engage with persons from other backgrounds has been elusive at best. We are working to learn how to bring our liberal do-gooder aspirations into true engagement with others, and this is an ongoing challenge for us. That's sort of our legacy of social work. And it continues on, as we see the activity standing up the highest number of UUs, and so on and so on, and our continual resistance to the current administration. Our theology, we keep claiming that we have a theology, and this is another word that we appropriate, but we have to change it, as our religion is no longer about our relation to God, which is what theology To us, theology is about the nature of being human, how we are related to all that exists, and how we are related to the ultimate ground of being, and how we understand the horizon towards which all life is oriented. It's a lot of stuff. But this is deeply important, as our understandings of such things shape our beliefs, our actions, and help to form our imaginations of what is possible. Our current theologians pull ideas from many sources, not just traditional religious sources or other religions from around the world, and there are very many Eastern influences and things like that in Unitarian theology. But also new thinking, things that include feminist and womanist, queer, disabled, post-colonial, and liberation theories and perspectives. All of these things about how to make the world better for the people that need it to be better for them. Most of us are less deliberate than professional theologians, and we tend to develop our working theologies on the fly, looking at things that work for us. But one of the hardest things to deal with is the divine. God is a question. We speak about the divine in many ways. Indeed, that's a big factor in our theological diversity. We might hear terms like spirit of life, source of all, ground of being, spirit, goddess, even God. These are names for ideas that some of us hold as the essential force that connects humankind and the cosmos. And each are understood by some as a higher power that can influence how we live and relate. Or they are understood by others of us as a metaphor for shared and common essence. Maybe or maybe not some sort of force that moves between us. Sometimes our ears hurt hearing words we don't appreciate. I encourage you all to be tolerant if you can and try to map some of these words to something else in your own mind. This came up recently in the discussion of some of the hymns we sing. The more traditional texts often include the word God and use God talk. I encourage you to not let this go. It has meaning to some people, or at least it did once, and let it stand. To sing that hymn does not mean you accept God. It's not like the Pledge of Allegiance. I would counsel you never to say it under God, because that's just wrong. But it has different meaning. Your conceptions of God rarely, or maybe never, include the notion of an all-powerful being who is in charge and directs affairs on earth. Indeed, we reject all ideas of God that might compromise human freedom, or that separate us from our responsibility to seek justice and goodness in this world. God will never be an excuse for wrongdoing. I use the words divine or sacred or even prayer to describe those things that place awe and wonder before you, that elicit a feeling of reverence, that hold deep meaning in my view of the cosmos. Divine being is close to me as my granddaughter, as large as all of nature, or as conceptual as evolution, etc. How we practice. We still tend to organize ourselves in a way that looks much like traditional church. Most GU congregations worship on Sundays, having services that resemble the traditional Protestant liturgical form. We do hymns and music, topical sermons, something like prayers, And we usually bring this forward in a blended repetition and ritual. Our similarity to mainstream church helps us to hold visibility in our community and be recognized as a faith. But it probably also scares away many who no longer want any association with church or with religion. We should always remain open to changes in this world, in the way we do church, or if we do church per se at all. The current formats are time proven and provide both comfort and stimulation to many of our members, but they are not essential to our purpose or to our mission. We do not need to keep finding ways to help persons relate to their lives in the world we live in. I'm sorry. We do. We need to keep finding ways to help people relate to life in the world we live in. We don't teach answers, but the traditionally religious questions are still important for us. Things like, where do I come from? Where am I? Where am I going? I think that's what it's like. What is the meaning of life? How do I find purpose? Why do bad things happen? How can I face loss and despair? These are things that people used to and always go to church to learn about. And there's no reason we don't care about it today. We just don't provide the same reasons. I'm going to skip the part about our core essence and the role of the principles in the values. That's something that's familiar and something we'll return to. And instead, I'll turn to just a couple of discussion things that are sort of more risky terrain. We youth have always tended to hold an optimism about human nature and the human condition. Recall the foundational ideas that we are made in the image of God and that we are all the beloved of God, going back to the 19th century. And we often rely on an implicit faith in moral progress and in human perfectibility. We frequently make reference to the Day of the Lord, Arthur Martin Luther King, Barack Obama quote that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. This is often the basis we use for offering hope and consolation in times where things feel otherwise. Is all of this really justified by anything other than wishful thinking? Is there any reason to believe that we humans are inherently good, which is so different from inherent worthy, which we do expect? The word from developmental psychologists is ambiguous. My intuition is that our human goodness values is much more the result of nurture in nature. And we can try to build a society where children are loved and supported and safe in order to help them move towards a goal of human goodness. But stuff happens in life, and we are all too aware of the negative effects of human greed, violence, and selfishness. We are challenged by the pervasive and persistent ways humans continue to harm one another and the planet, despite knowing that. We have to make room for this, I think. One suggestion is to speak not of original sin or original blessing, as religions have but to instead assert that we are born into original struggle, with the line between good and evil running through every human heart. This clearly would be a new religious pragmatism, and it does not fly in the face of what we have. However we view human nature, we know that we must make space in our worship for dealing with the harms, evils, and griefs of experience. And we can work to improve our lamentation, repentance, Lord, forgiveness, and human healing. Next, I think we all know what a knee-jerk Christian is, and we mock them with some regularity. These are folks that regularly attend church and consider themselves to be upstanding citizens and stalwarts of the community, while they completely ignore the main teachings of Jesus as found in the Gospels. Many good Christians support punishing the poor, excluding the refugee, and demonizing the outsider. We know it is possible to use one's faith as a prop while practicing hypocrisy, because we see it all the time. All we have to do is look at Congress. What will our version of a knee-jerk you look like? Here's one. I think it's very possible to belong to one of our congregations, as one might belong to any social club. Assuming that by association with you, we automatically gain a liberal credibility, then a hall pass to get us out of religious practice, and that inoculates us from committing to a path of personal and moral good. They're all interesting people here. Why not just come in and go along for the ride? It's sort of a fun thing. I know that our churches and congregations, though, can provide a transformative spiritual experience and help sustain a lifetime path of personal growth and fulfillment. But only if one puts in the effort and commits to exploring and sharing and learning about all the important life lessons along the way. When we reject the notion of an external divine force guiding our daily life, we must therefore assume that we, each person and all humanity, hold the responsibility to care for our neighbors and our planet. We are all there is in forming and bringing the image of our lives. One of the things we constantly claim is the value and richness we obtain from this climate of theological pluralism and diversity. We do not teach belief, but rather ask each person to engage in a personal search for truth and understanding. And that's all well and good, but it sounds sort of isolating and personalized and maybe even lonely. What has a potentially transformative power is coming together to share our thoughts, beliefs, and ideas. We need to engage the beliefs of others, not only to come to know them better, but to learn more about ourselves. We need to learn to share safely and without judgment. One example is me. I always considered myself to be an atheist, and once had little or no tolerance for explanations that involve any superhuman force or God. And that was true until I started engaging people with the leaders of many schools. I needed to learn what they viewed in their own guidance, how they related to their God, and what it meant for their understanding of themselves and everything around them. I have heard many things that I wouldn't personally accept, but also many things that seem strikingly similar to my own thoughts. But mostly I could hear the goodness and reverence that came through the images these people carried. Discussion and sharing is essential if we are ever to learn and grow. I think this is a commitment every you should make, especially within our congregation. And it's not always easy. Sharing deep ideas is not a natural activity at coffee hour or in the park. I believe that we should provide better venues and opportunities for sharing, for personal discourse, for dealing with real and deep problems. And I think this is going to be a problem Simon for being able to come here. We have a few possibilities under consideration, but I strongly believe we need to recreate a set of small group discussion units within this church. I think the EU concept of salvation is found in the idea of making this life for each of us something worth living and worthy of pride. This resonates with all I know, that we only have this one life, and that what we do and know in this span is our everything. Our paradise, our hell, our legacy, our meaning, and our purpose. Our ministry in this church is to assist one another in bringing more fulfillment, more belonging, and more sense of rightness into this brief and fleeting moment we know of life. Now, right now, words. I didn't spend a lot of time on justice. You know all about that. And I was hope that some of these things might come from your thought and might support activities we move into in the future. And now we'll do whatever we're going to tell you. Item number 299. Okay. Why don't people rise, stretch your legs, shake it out.